dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it
Good morning, Dungeon Master of None listeners.
Hi, I'm Dungeon Master Rob.
And I'm Dungeon Master Matt, and today we have a special guest joining us from, let's see, I have down here the heart of the Shire, from the desolate isle, the soggiest place on earth, where Dane law rules. It's Ben Wenham. Ben, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Right here from Turf Island.
That's right. Ben is Dungeon Master of None's professional English 40K correspondent. Our man on the ground in behind enemy territory, telling us about all the delightful things that are happening on, the dreaded isles, the gloomiest place on earth.
Ben may be right behind his microphone ready to record a podcast with us, but I can tell our listeners he is operating 6 drones. They're monitoring Game Workshop headquarters and every one of their locations throughout England, Scotland, and Ireland.
I'd need a lot more than 6 drones for that.
Yeah, they've got a lot. There's a lot going on. Listen, keen-eyed, real DM of None heads will remember that we spoke at length about Warhammer 40K, and Ben was nice enough to give us a really thorough write-up on the current state of things, the history of the sort of the company and its relationship to, or attempt to not have a relationship to, fascism and all of that. And that has not really been, this was a year ago? That has not really been resolved. 40K continues to exist in a liminal space, one might say, where it tries to be all things to all people. But that was really helpful for me in understanding the specifics of what had happened, Ben. I've already thanked you, but thank you again for, being our guide to this delightful clusterfuck of a hobby.
On that point, it is worth noting that they have yet again tried to distance themselves from their fascist fans, this time making it really quite explicit. Not as explicit as I would have liked, but yeah.
It might help our listeners to just talk briefly about, 40K, Warhammer Fantasy. These things are just such a giant presence in the tabletop hobby. It's either the biggest or the second biggest company in tabletop, and I feel like, at least online or just casually talking with people, 40K, Warhammer Fantasy Battles, Age of Sigmar, and all their associated properties and video games and role-playing games, they just have such an outsized presence. I feel like more people know about 40K or Warhammer Fantasy than actually play the game. And maybe it's just because they have so many side products and things like that. I don't know. I'm just curious what y'all think about the fact that it's just so big. Why is it so big? It is just a very old, sort of clunky war game. That's so expensive.
A very expensive war game.
Yes, it is expensive. So I think to understand that, first of all, size. I'm not sure it's as small as you think it is. It's about the quarter of the size of WotC. In terms of revenue and profit. It turns over in a year what WotC does in 3 months. It's also a huge hobby worldwide. It just tends to be much bigger in Europe and the UK. I'd love to say those were the same things, but have been denied that pleasure.
Once upon a time.
Your wooden wall protects you from
now it's a
continental.
I don't even know what they make ships out of these days. Carbon steel wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so we've got this sort of situation where I sort of would explain it this way. Hang-Yon Chang, the Korean economist, in his book 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism,
It's a great book. Yeah.
he references a antiquated Spanish textbook that says, in Latin America, everyone has a maid. And what he's actually saying is that service is a much more common employment role in Latin America, and therefore many people have domestic service. In much the same way, everybody in the UK plays Games Workshop at least for a little while.
That's really interesting. So Matt, sorry, you're an expert on this, but Matt and I had a similar experience. Both of us have traveled a little bit in the EU and the UK, and Matt was telling me about this, and for me it was I think it was Freiburg in Germany, and Matt, I don't remember where you said it was for you, but we were just, and it's not like an enormous town. It's a decent sized like city in Germany, but I remember there was a Games Workshop just like on the main strip, like in the center of the city, like a large bustling hobby store. And listen, here in America, where we have oodles of disposable income and waste and all kinds of things, even major cities don't
and
have
strip malls. We have lots of strip malls for Games Workshop stores to exist in.
Yeah, they don't all have Games Workshops, and some of them don't even have hobby stores anymore, or they're slowly regaining the ones that were lost. So this was a surprise and kind of a shock to me, and I think your point is well taken that in the UK and the EU that there's a large contingent of Warhammer players.
Absolutely. Every town in the UK, again, much in the same way as before, has a Games Workshop. If it's a mid to large sized town, and basically every city, you're gonna find a Games Workshop, and it forms like the substrate of UK gaming life. If I were to move to the other end of the country tomorrow, leave everybody I know behind, I could have a gaming group, within a week.
Be able to find somebody to play 40K with. That's interesting.
And obviously it's not as big in the States. I think the other reason it feels like it has an outsized sort of impact is that a lot of people in the UK who have never played it know what it is. My lovely wife, before she met me, had never been into a Games Workshop, but she still had a vague idea what it was and what it was about.
So I have a theory about this. I feel like 40K sits in a similar spot that Marvel used to, Wizards of the Coast, that
comic
it was,
book shops here, maybe.
Yeah, it was big and popular among the people who went on to, I guess, define video games, more broadly define culture. And so I think a lot of people have probably, they've probably played, like, this is not 40K, but like the Warhammer Total War games, or they've seen Space Marines video games. Maybe they played Dawn of War or any of these video games. They've seen the art that flies around on the internet, some of it ironic, some of it not. And so it's got similar to everyone knows what Dungeons and Dragons is, even if they have never played it, or even really have a good understanding what it is. I think that 40K, regardless of its actual size, is culturally more of a juggernaut, in the same way that a lot of things that were popular in the 80s and 90s are still popular.
I think that it's fair to say that nerd culture as a whole has an outsized influence on internet culture. So you do get a lot of 40K and Warhammer related memes, even before you get into the influence of some of the darker forces of the internet.
Yeah, it tends to filter down. I have been shocked well, I don't know if I should be shocked anymore. This is 10 years on, but the way that bizarre memes and images filter down from places like 4chan, which is where a lot of the 40K, again, ironic and unironic art and memes come from, like somehow make it to, to God Emperor Trump, to the point where like ordinary people are referencing, again, Warhammer 40K. It's truly, we live in a wild time, everybody.
If your racist uncle posts a meme of God Emperor Trump, he's also implying that, I guess, like, rural Appalachians are the Eldar Exodites who have preserved their souls from Slaanesh, and he has a sophisticated understanding of the 40K.
That's right. It's a very nuanced meme that he's posting. Yeah,
politics.
Yeah, it's at least 7 layers deep.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I feel like, so back to like role playing games. There's been like some Warhammer and 40K role playing games. Back in the day, I owned the like Dark Heresy books, and they're just like very detailed and very clunky system. They have like a new system by Cubicle 7. It's just like, I feel like everyone talks about 40K, but like the number of people who have ever played a Warhammer Fantasy or 40K role-playing game is like less than 0.1%. I know the data from Roll20 say there was like, I don't know, like a 5% of the population had played a Warhammer 40K role-playing game, but it's just the systems were so bad, and the world is so confusing and, in a sense, pointless. Like, I just don't know why people are so enamored of this world. I guess it's just so much art and stuff about it.
Not to interrupt, but I think I remember on Roll20's data that like Warhammer Fantasy was one of the, again, not top 5, but maybe top 10. And as a role-playing game, it leaves a lot to be desired. But I guess maybe there really is that cultural influence, momentum. It's
Ben, was that the case in England? Is just because everyone knows about Warhammer, like when people were picking up their first role-playing game, were they just as likely to pick up Warhammer Fantasy as they were Dungeons and Dragons back in the early aughts or 90s? 80s?
I think in a lot of cases more likely. D&D is certainly hegemonic here, but it has a definite rival in like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Here it is Wuthrop, and everybody I know who is of who sort of came into adulthood by 2000 or 2001, and all of their older brothers and sisters, if they were involved in role playing, had probably played it a couple of times at least. And that is not always the case for D&D.
Well, to stick on Warhammer Fantasy, here's a question I've always had, because I don't know as much about Warhammer Fantasy, mostly because I played for like a year 40K in college after, some of my friends convinced me to like blow all my money on some like Grey Knight army so they could just absolutely destroy me with their, like bullshit Eldar grav tanks or whatever. And they're like, well, thanks for spending $200 and all your time painting to join us. But like, I don't know as much about Warhammer Fantasy. Rob and I, for like a month in like 2010, like played the Warhammer Online game.
Oh
that
yeah,
was not
Warhammer
very good. Remember
Reckoning,
that?
I think. I remember
yeah.
that. That was a brief MMO blip, but
Yeah.
we did play that.
It's gonna be the next WoW killer. Does Warhammer Fantasy have the like same relationship with like right-wing politics in Great Britain, like during the 80s, and does it have the same like relationship with like fascism and the alt-right or is it like kind of separate from that because it's in such a weird like fake Holy Roman Empire setting?
To answer that question, there is definitely some of that. anything where you've got like witch hunters as a
Yeah.
an element is going to attract a little bit of that kind of thing, and anything with references to sort of European past is probably going to attract some of it. But Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is a game where you largely play working class heroes who are out to try and, you know, get a buck so they can survive and have a better life. It's pretty innately got some leftist themes going on. Like there's a hard scrabble to try and make a better world for yourselves in a place and time where aristocracy has all the power and all the wealth. And very often you are fighting forces within the state, corrupt forces within the state, but you know, it is generally speaking the people in power, be that merchants or bureaucrats or whatever, that you are taking on in your work.
This is really interesting. So I know even less than Matt does. So, you know, you'll both have to correct me if I'm getting things wildly wrong about Warhammer in general. But I wonder, or it seems to me that possibly the presence of chaos as a force, as a corrupting influence, is just as sort of like a baseline of the Warhammer universe, is sort of by itself implies the corruptibility and the imperfection of a lot of like hierarchies and structures that, you know, it's such a common theme for people in power to be poisoned by, and again, it's made explicit what is sort of, you know, abstract in the real world. But am I right about that? Like, that's how it feels to me whenever I'm, you know, engaging with a Warhammer game.
As a general rule, I think the sort of the preferred reading of all Warhammer texts is that power corrupts and authority is bad. But the way it chooses to explore this is through portraying the abuse of authority, rather than focusing on like, how do we make this better? At least in 40k, in Warhammer, like fantasy, the how do we make this better, or how do we root out this particular bad thing, is much more sort of explicit. The enemy within campaign, which fairly regularly gets selected as one of the best pre-written campaigns ever published, is explicitly about trying to weed out corruption within power structures. And, you know, it's a bloody good time to play, and really does sort of explore how power corrupts. But again, in 40k, the way it chooses to show this is, oh yeah, if you do capitalism for, you know, 10,000 years, you destroy planets, and that's fine because there are always more planets.
Right, and you get cool armor and cool guns, and
oh yeah, definitely
the beautiful trappings of Empire. Everybody loves it. Well, this is Matt. I know if I'm stepping on you, but this is your second question about Warhammer. So again, we already talked about this, but this brings us to the satire question, and there's been some talk recently online about Verhoeven, for example, about Starship Troopers and RoboCop, and which are, in my opinion, very explicit satires of the police, of fascism, of the military in general. Almost, again, I didn't understand it when I was 12, but I as soon as I, you know, developed enough brain cells to think critically, I was like, I get it. But it does seem that people have trouble, especially Americans, struggle with nuance. So talk to us about the fascism problem in 40k, and I guess what's that meme? Satire requires clarity of purpose, or whatever. How I guess the game, the industry sort of failed to, at least at first, make it clear that it was satire.
So I think early on they really didn't. Back in the days of Rogue Trader and the original Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I think the leftish or possibly even explicitly left-wing sentiments of the founders and writers were really quite explicit. The artwork in Rogue Trader, which is the first edition of 40k, makes it pretty clear that Marines are not like to be idolized. Their background is explicitly that they are penal soldiers that turned into warrior monks. It's really, quite a So the one I love is there's a chapter in that book that's named after the Greenpeace ship that was bombed by
Rainbow
French intelligence.
Warriors.
Yeah, Rainbow Warriors.
Mm-hmm.
It wears its politics on its sleeve. Now I am, it would take a proper historian to go in and do a lot of work on it, but my suspicion is that the turn comes with the release of their first real mass market work, which is a game called Adeptus Titanicus. They, as a company, got enough capital together to get injection molding technology so that they could make plastic figures. And a mass market game is going to need a mass market appeal story to go with it. This is where they start adding in the Horus Heresy as an idea, an apocalyptic pre-war that destroyed everything. You get to play giant robots fighting in that war. It's all well and good, except that it sold really well. And then they started doing other sets, and that sort of grimdark, that particularly grimdark and not quite such a satirical take starts to take over in the way that things are presented. Now it's still that satire is still there. It's just not quite as explicit and broad anymore. And I think quite importantly, the quality of the writing and artists, or maybe less the artists, but certainly the quality of the writing has improved over the years since. And that helps to make things look through subtlety. And I know it's a weird thing to say about 40k, because it's not in any way subtle, but it is compared to what it was. They've started to obscure some of that history of itself. And that sort of leads me to, I take it you're both aware of Stuart Hall?
No.
Okay, so Stuart Hall
Tell
is
us.
a British sociologist, a British Jamaican sociologist, who...
yes, but please tell me about... Yeah, now I know what you're talking about.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
Who came up with something called reception theory, which is a way of looking at media. So he proposes three sort of ways of looking, which is a preferred reading, an oppositional reading, and a negotiated reading. So the preferred reading is what the author's intending you to read. An oppositional is an alternate reading that really doesn't have any crossover, and then a negotiated reading combines the two. And I'd say that the preferred reading of 40k is still ecocide bad, fascism bad. If you do these things, it's a death cult. Special extinction is inevitable. You need to not do this. However, it when you dress up your big sort of dead god and put him on a throne, and you give him lightning bolt insignias and eagles, you're gonna make it attractive to a certain crowd. To be clear, that's people with fascist politics. And there is another way of reading everything in 40k, which is something along the lines of strength is good. In the face of great threats, anything is permissible. The kind of things that are going to appeal to the fascist sensibility, or at the very least the far right or extreme right sensibility.
Well,
So, yeah.
and this, it's in a way, I guess, not terribly surprising that 40k took this turn, because this was all during the 1,000-year reign of your glorious Iron Lady and the far, just general rightward swing of culture and politics, and just the homeostasis going in a whole different direction. But it's still kind of strange, and as you described it, that the more I look at it, the more it's clear, again, that it's a satire, that it is not desirable to be a space marine, that it is not good to idolize a decrepit god emperor. But somehow, like you just described, there's, I guess people can read into anything that they want, and you can't. This is a frustration for me because, again, the Verhoeven discussion, I feel like we can, in a way, you can't even be satirical anymore if you want fascists to not co-opt your art and draw the wrong conclusions from it. This happened with the Wachowskis as well. They, I very much liked the most recent Matrix movie. It was unsubtle. It was extremely unsubtle in its themes and about what it was trying to say, because I think the Wachowskis were trying to send a message. The red pill is not when you hate women. It's a trans metaphor. They're just like bopping you over the head with it, because you cannot be subtle enough anymore, and to avoid this particular form of co-option.
So I think that there's a really interesting bit in Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, that gets to this, which is one of the elements of fascistic politics is the destruction of our common sense of reality. So when you have lied for 5 years straight as a political class, as broadly speaking has happened here and in the US, and you make everything a battle based on ideology, you get to a situation where no one has an agreed common ground for reality, and at that point you can just say, yeah, the Matrix is about how you should be horrible to people, rather than this is a metaphor for transition, which is quite clearly the preferred reading of that film. But yeah, you have red-pilled as this common piece of parlance on the far right.
And to be clear, I believe that the author is dead, has been killed. You can read anything you want, and a text exists outside of its creator. But I also don't believe in sort of the unlimited application of that. To read the opposite into, again, very explicit texts is, to me, particularly egregious, and so it requires a level of disassociation for what's actually there that's bewildering and frustrating to me. And yeah, that's the thing about about 40K that's really interesting is, just the level of, I guess, delusion about this. But sorry, we had some other questions
Well,
about.
I was curious.
Yeah.
Now that we've talked about this kind of background, is like what's been going on with like 40K and Warhammer in the like past couple years. You mentioned, right, the like, you know, ownership, leadership has put out a lot of statements like along the lines of like if you're hateful, you know, this is not for you kind of thing, and there's a backlash among the fascist people who are fans of this, and you know, people I think like pledge that like, oh, I'm not going to play this game anymore, I'm going to go play some other game. Like, is 40, so I have a question about that, but also like, is 40K still the like fascism like reactionary factory, at least online, that it was kind of in the like pre-Trump era of like people posting on 4chan like, hey, become a fascism, you get to play 40K or something like that. Has that changed? And is like, did people actually like leave the hobby because of this shift from their leadership?
So yeah, the original sort of thing that this kicked off was around the Floyd uprising. GW put out a message that was broadly, you know, anti-hate. It was pretty milquetoast, but you know, good nonetheless. Solemn JPEG. What are you going to do? It was badly received by some fans. There was a bit of I guess an attempt to rally round that message by non-chuddy fans who were like, actually, this is our hobby and we don't really want you dickheads in here. That kind of simmered down, but at the same time, a fairly significant consumer rebellion has been going on. Games Workshop as a company is very powerful and behaves as companies do in their own interest, and often at the expense of their fans. They've been using a lot of FOMO marketing. FOMO is fear of missing out, for those who aren't aware. Selling very limited runs of kits or like collections of models at a somewhat better price. And that's produced a massive scalper market that has basically existed on eBay, and they've been unwilling to do anything about it for a long time. But this rebellion sort of got them to do something about it, and now they're still doing limited runs, but they're making it so you can pre-order, and if you pre-order, that order will be fulfilled, and they'll make enough to, you know, make sure everybody who ordered got some. So that sort of melting pot did lead to a diaspora out of 40K. Not everybody, by any stretch of the imagination, went, but quite a lot of people turned up in the BattleTech community.
Oh, yes.
That was interesting because it started to show up some of the underlying problems in that community as well.
Mainly that company is even more of a shit show than Games Workshop is, unfortunately. Fascism aside, just astonishingly poorly run and managed.
Absolutely. So Arch Warhammer, as he was once known, a sort of chud YouTuber who focused on Warhammer lore videos, did an interview with some sort of BattleTech YouTube people.
Yeah, there's a guy named Tex Talks BattleTech or something like that.
And when people were like, you don't want this guy in your community, our BattleTech, their mod team went full nuke on basically anyone who was talking about the issue and trying to raise it. It has since become really clear that one of their main moderates is either ex or current Gamergate. He's up on Kotaku in Action and the like. So that particular chunk of that community is probably not safe, and I think that what is happening is some of the chuddier elements of the Warhammer community is really finding a home there. That said, there's been no let-up in the production of awfulness and nastiness within the community itself. So
I guess that brings me to another question, which is that if you reasonably like to play war games, if you enjoy the crunchy measuring tape, beautiful crafted scenery of 40K, if you like to paint miniatures, if you like big stompy robots, is there anything else? Like what is there? Are there competitors? Are there places to go? What is there to play if you're, is 40K the only game in town?
Certainly in the UK, as far as like major fantasy war games, it is overwhelmingly the dominant factor. I don't know so much about the US. There are other games, but it's like D&D. You can go to a friendly local gaming store, most places in North America or the UK, and you can probably get into like an Adventurers League game or something. Here you can get into a game of Warhammer. It's much harder when your game of choice is something else, which it makes it quite hard to formulate a culture that is apart from that. There is, however, some success in sections of the Warhammer community to produce safer versions of the hobby. The 28mm community, who are around stuff like Inquisitor 28 and other narrative skirmish games, they tend to be pretty good about policing their spaces and keeping the worst sort of far-right politics out.
To wrap up our Warhammer and 40K discussion, if like you're like me and have been exposed to it and like maybe in college, like read like one novel of it or played like one game, and you're like, it seems like there might be some like interesting things here, like from a role-playing game perspective, from a dungeon master's perspective. Are there anything that like you personally like really like about the setting, the mechanics, the stories, the feel, the magic that you're like, this has kind of inspired some of my dungeon mastering or my games at my table and isn't all that bad?
So as far as taking something out of it into other things, I think that that both Warhammer and 40K's role-playing games have historically done a really good job of looking at what it's like to be at the basis of a society, looking upwards, and I think that there's a lot that can be said in, say, D&D to playing, or to the idea of playing people who are under a hierarchy and are trying to make good under that situation. It provides a lot of gameable material and the opportunity to really engage in a fun way with that.
Speaking of role-playing games, we're big fans of your, I guess it was last year or was it 2 years ago, came out on itch, the city of the Red Pox, and this is just like a fun want to say creepy Venice, Genoa, like a city for your players to inhabit. It's written for Troika, but I mean, I've used parts of it in my games, and this is just one of your many projects. So, let's talk about how you create creepy and doom and gloom stuff and fun horror at your table.
So for me as a creator, I take influences from all over the place, especially anything that makes me scared or sad in real life. I know that not everybody has received City of the Red Pox particularly well because of its themes relating to the current unpleasantness, but it was
a little bit of unfortunate timing.
Yeah.
It's not your fault. I recently watched,
or is it? No, it's not. It's not.
I recently watched the TV adaptation of Station 11, which was a book I liked a lot, and the TV show was great. Unfortunately, it involves a respiratory virus that destroys the world and makes it hard for me to recommend to other people. It also made it hard to watch, but so I gotta keep telling those stories, and so yeah, I liked it, even though I actually like City of the Red Pox a lot. So, but yeah, that's sometimes life gets in the way.
Yeah. So I've been worried about the potential of pandemic for sort of about 10 years. There is probably somewhere evidence of this on the Paizo message boards. And I was very interested in the way that states weren't taking it seriously, and the way that the American healthcare system was going to not do well. What I hadn't taken into account when I was talking about it, though, was that the British healthcare system would not be a happy place either, largely because of 10 years of ideological austerity, and then a government that just didn't really seem to understand what was happening. But yeah, it's very much those real life things that have inspired me. My Call of Cthulhu work tends to be around neurodivergence in a lot of ways. I'm multiply neurodivergent and suffer from mental health problems, and that writing is a good way to explore ideas that come out of that. A lot of stuff to do with memory and identity. The next thing I have coming out through Sentinel Hill Press is all about what it would be like to be forgotten by everybody that you know, and how much of who you are is dependent on people's acceptance of that. So yeah.
Damn, that sounds super dark and super cool.
Yeah.
So in the game, like you're a character who no one remembers.
Scenario is called Antigonish. It should be coming out probably next year in issue 6 of the Arkham Gazette. In it, you play a group of investigators who are investigating someone who claims to know them, and can produce significant amounts of evidence that they do so, but they have no memory of it at all. And as they investigate and find more and more, it becomes clear that one of their friends has literally taken this person's life. But there's it's a 2-act piece, and at the climax of the first act, this creature steals one of the PC's lives, and the second half of it is right now everybody has to treat that person like they don't know him, and we go through the process of proving that this player character is in fact who they claim to be and destroying the entity.
Damn, that sounds fun as hell.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
These are
light some
these
candles
are
and play this.
fears that I share, Ben. So I like you. I enjoy grappling with, exercising my terrors through the things that I create and the games that I play. So that sounds both horrifying and very appealing to me.
What did you say? What?
What?
Who are you?
Fuck you, Ben.
So, what?
Fuck off. Fuck off, Matt.
Tell us more about, like, listen, we talked about the two juggernauts of the RPG space, but like, what's it like in the like indie scene? I think a lot of our listeners are like really interested in playing games that are not D&D, but also like playing games that are not D&D, that are not just made by one of the mid-size game companies, or like, you know, made by like a, you know, a single creator. Like, what's it like working in the indie scene? What are you excited about? Let's get indie.
So like the really indie scene is obviously cooler than you could possibly know, and you know, it was cool before any of you heard about it. So but it's hard work. You are up against, you know, finely tuned machines of capital out there to hoover up all the money. But it also provides a great deal of freedom. Writing for Sentinel Hill Press or for myself, I'm able to do things that WotC would never let me do if I were to write for them, for instance. And explore ideas that are not unpalatable, but less clearly, obviously gameable. So I think even if we were not in the darkest timeline, Red Pox would probably not have been an overwhelmingly happy and shiny book. So it allows me to explore stuff like that. There are also some really good people out here working in this this area and producing work that is, I would argue, you know, significantly better than a lot of what's being put out by WotC. So if you want one of the best dungeons written in, you know, the last 10 years, you need look no further than Gradient Descent by Luke Gearing for the Mothership role-playing game. It is genuinely a masterpiece, and Wizards aren't going to be putting out something as good this time of the heat death of the universe. I think I can fairly safely say.
One thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad you brought up a Mothership game, is that like the indie scene like is in a weird relationship with sort of the ways to get things out, right? There's one bookshelf and you know, the DM's Guild / Drive-Through RPG. There's itch.io, and of course there's the other juggernaut in our hobby and industry, which is Kickstarter. And City of the Red Pox was produced on, or you raised money on Kickstarter. I mean, several of our listeners have asked us about like Kickstarters. Like, what was it like to make a small Kickstarter? And by small, it was quite huge. You had 200 backers, or 200 plus backers.
That is small for a Kickstarter of even within Zine Quest. Running a Kickstarter is sort of 3 months of...
we have 100 Patreons and about 2,000 regular listeners, so it seems like a lot to me. I'm not sure that we could get that many backers regardless.
We could not. So, but yes, yeah. What was it like?
So yeah,
Give yourself credit is all I'm saying, But yeah, yes, I
Thank you.
understand that absolutely it's small in terms.
You're not bringing in that Marvel Zombies money,
right? But sorry, tell us about the experience of it.
So it's about 3 months of work. So you need to have your marketing set up ahead of time, which is about a month of work before you launch. You ideally want to have about $1,000's worth of art if you are going out there and hiring artists, because backers expect to see art. Then during its running, you are answering questions every day, you are writing updates, you are putting it out on social media, driving it every way you can, sorting out ad buys. And then when you're done, you have probably a solid month of work at the delivery point where you have to make sure that everything's sent out, that there are no problems with stuff that has been sent out, sending out additional copies if there's damage and stuff. And all of that is on top of writing a book or whatever else you might make. It's absolutely worth it. I couldn't have made the book without it. But make sure if you're going to do it, you are factoring in some portion of what the revenue you raise to pay yourself for that work, because it is work.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really easy to run a Kickstarter and then end up with zero net, at least for yourself, right?
Yeah. So, like the best piece of advice I can give regarding Kickstarters is, maybe don't do it. At least not as your first port of call. If one of the listeners wanted to put out a small indie project, their best bet by quite a large margin is to put out a very small zine, like a pocket fold, which is where you take a sheet of A4 paper and you turn it into a tiny little booklet. Design one of those, put it up on itch, and send it to some people and try your hand at the actual process before you start thinking about books. I wish I'd done that. I had to learn a lot in a very short space of time.
I just read a couple weeks ago a really interesting kind of deep dive on a blog called Split Party by Ludovico Alves about the sort of relationship between TTRPGs and Kickstarter and how it's kind of the nexus for not only like anyone who like wants to get started, kickstart their own like publishing, but like for a lot of companies too, right? BattleTech is one example, or Catalyst Games, but also like bigger companies like Monty Cook Games, Magpie Press. Most of their offerings are coming through Kickstarter these days.
Yeah, and I have mixed feelings about that. I'm not going to say that like Magpie Games shouldn't be on there.
No, of course not. I'm not saying that they they gotta survive, right?
I am going to say that maybe the creators of Zombicide are in a position where they could move beyond, and shouldn't be using it as a
I think
fancy
that-
pre-order service.
Listen, no one has ever heard of some of these characters they're putting into their game. The Scarlet Witch? Who even is that? Rogue?
the
Is that the
point-
character class? No, it's a mutant? I can't.
The point of the article, I think, and this was what I agreed with, was that it's not necessarily healthy for the hobby that Kickstarter is the staging ground for everything from your little indie project to the official Avatar role-playing game or whatever. That tends to compress and distort the market in a way that isn't very good for small creators. And I think you've kind of alluded to this, but ideally you use Kickstarter until you're big enough, and then you don't anymore, because it's you don't have to give them a cut, and you have your own distribution network or whatever. But as it stands, everybody from little bitty to enormous still is kind of obliged to use it.
Yeah, very much so. The large companies who use it are crowding out smaller users. That is undeniable. At the same time, they do bring in large numbers of users who may discover your work. It's a difficult balance. Certainly, again, I think Magpie. They're not a huge company, and because it's a licensed thing, they probably wouldn't have gotten the money from the creators of Avatar. So I'm always happy to see people in the RPG industry do well. Large sort of board game producers who've had multiple successful runs on a game. Who are now working with Marvel, maybe a little bit more ambivalent about. That said, I think the problems with Kickstarter run way further than just the kinds of people on it. While they have now unionized, they made it pretty difficult for their workers to do so. They're currently exploring moving on to blockchain, which I've got to say I struggle to see the use case. It also, for me, opens up really serious concerns about the privacy of my customers' data. I live in technically still within the EU for the purposes of a law called GDPR, which means I have responsibilities to people whose data I hold, and I could become, I could be fined fairly large amounts of money if I messed with that. So it's a non-trivial concern to me that, like, when it's on a blockchain, it's public access data.
I work in an industry where this is relevant, and GDPR is great. I love it. It's terrific. It is going to the EU is making a lot of moves to actually enforce it in ways that are going to potentially disrupt exactly what you described. And I think I don't know that Kickstarter is actually going to do any of this blockchain shit. I often feel like that is something that companies will throw out to get investor interest. But if they do, that would be hugely problematizing for a lot of reasons, including the one that you described, but also just because what's the use case? What's the point? Anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Then there's the volatility of cryptocurrency. I don't really want to get paid for my work in a currency that is going to crash overnight, and mean I don't have the money for the printer anymore. Just that's not a great look for me.
Yeah.
And they've not been clear whether they would be using this as part of accepting cryptocurrency. The whole point there is quite weird, and I hope they don't do it. But they also behave pretty badly in a number of other ways for our industry, specifically with regards to zines. Right now, this month, would normally be Zine Quest, which is a festival of zine creation that they run. With about a month's notice, they moved it from February, which is almost the perfect time of year for it, to just before Gen Con, which means a whole host of indie creators had a bit of a panic attack. The attention that Zine Quest brings to creators allows a first-time publisher such as myself to put out a 200 backer project, based on the quality of work they put up for display. It's really hard to get that kind of attention in the current Kickstarter market. If you don't have something like Zine Quest bringing in people looking specifically for that kind of work. How we move sort of beyond that is tricky. It probably means spreading out across numerous crowdfunding platforms. There's a new model called itch funding, where you do a reverse sale on an item as a way of saying, hey, look, I'm trying to fund this on itch. There are a number of newer crowdfunding platforms that have opened up that are allowing people to do things, but it's hard times, especially if you want to be not backing Kickstarter because of the crypto angle.
So you put out Red Pox on itch. Like, is itch okay? Like, was that experience good or bad? Neutral? True neutral? Unaligned?
Itch give you significantly better rates for how much they take than One Bookshelf do. They also allow much greater curation of your landing page, so it is possible to set up an itch web page as this is where you send people who want to buy your work or even are interested in your work, and they'll be able to look through what you've produced and find cool things there. It also has made its position against blockchain really quite explicit. It provides a platform for adult content that is sort of second to none for those who wish to produce such things, which is good because, what people want to make and consume really should be up to them, not a company like One Bookshelf.
Yeah. I've heard good things from other creators about itch. It sounds like it's a little harder to make money because you don't have the same, I guess, visibility as Kickstarter, but the money you make, you get to keep more of, you have more control, you're not sending money to a dubious third party. So I've heard similar reports from others in the space.
Yeah. Certainly, it is not clear to me that it would allow me to produce something like Red Pox. But I think there are probably other ways to do that. One of the things that I'm doing, the next but one project I'm sort of doing myself, Exalted Funeral, the seller of all sorts of interesting zines and the like, are funding the art and printing of a zine I'm putting together, and they'll take a cut, but they pay, excellent royalties, which is good.
Well, speaking of that, is there anything that is, coming up for you in the near future that you want to hype up or plug?
Yeah, there are two things sort of that might be of interest to listeners. So hopefully by the end of this month, I'm going to be putting out some sort of crowdfunding for a book called, well, a zine called Isosahedron, Eye of Lass, and Other Relics. It's good when you can't pronounce the name of your own product.
It's a mouthful. That's okay.
It's 25 magic items for a game called OSC, which is a form of basic Dungeons and Dragons. That's going to be edited by Matthew Kay, who was the editor on Red Pox, who is just, second to none. He's a really solid editor. And it's going to be arted and printed by Two Rats Press, who are a couple of awesome sort of game designers and artists here in the UK. Axe and Dross, they live up in Edinburgh and are thoroughly decent people. We're going to be printing that on Riso, which is a really interesting printing method, which you probably came across whilst you were at school. It's effectively a form of photocopier that uses ink in a drum with a
Oh yeah, I have made a lot of
reader.
copies using a Rizzo, however you say it.
That's cool. I know.
It produces a very interesting like print texture, and it's a bit of like the new hotness in indie spaces. As far as like use cases, it's 25 magic items. They're not 5e compatible per se, but it wouldn't take much to drag one out and put it into your game, and you'll find things in there like Tyrant Breaker, which is a sword that does more damage to nobility and kings and queens. So I'm quite keen on it. Sort of a little further out, I've got another as yet unnamed zine that is an adventure set in a misty, weird forest that is folded in on itself. It's the different places within it form nodes of a hypercube, and you have to find a way out and rescue a man who's trapped there in a dream. I'll certainly let you know about it when it's sort of ready to go.
Hell yeah.
Sounds great.
Other than that, I've got work coming out with Arkham Gazette. Hopefully I will get to finish the series of adventures I'm doing with them, but we'll see.
Awesome.
Well, Ben, unless you have anything else you want to plug or say final words for our listeners about, if you can try and wrap it up and say something about Kickstarter, indie publishing, creating dread in your games, or fascism, or 40K, or Warhammer Fantasy Battles. You just talk about all those things in one quick sentence. But thank you for coming on.
So I'll keep it brief. You can find me at Dark Forest Press. I think that's right. Is that right? I'm gonna.
We will make sure to include the
link in the show notes.
The show notes, yeah.
That's sort of the place to find me, where I will be doing weird things on the internet and arguing with people lots, no doubt. I'm also on the Dungeon Master of None Discord server.
Oh yeah, you're active in our Discord. You post in the Homebrew channel a lot. A lot of good stuff.
Fair
there.
man, yeah.
Yeah. Stop on by and say hi to Ben, please, everyone.
Yeah, other than that, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a real delight. Thank you for coming on, Ben.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Solidarity across the pond.
That's right.
Stay dry over there.
Two nations.
Soggy Island.
divided by a common language, and yet we managed to make it work. Thanks for
Well,
coming on.
we actually figured out what is going on in the Anglosphere, right? This is the difference between the U.S. and the U.K. Is one is a D&D Magic the Gathering nation, and another is a 40K
is a Warhammer
miniatures
nation.
nations, and that's why we're so different.
I think that does sum up some of the difference. We also, Judge Dredd is a really important thing in our national character, so unless you can understand Dredd, you can't really understand us.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, I can see the apartment towers of Mega City 1 out the back window on your camera, and we are the law. I am the law. You are the law.
I thought I'd closed the window. Sorry about that. If a block war starts, we're all done for. Right, thank you again.
Like Matt said, solidarity. We'll share all of your cool stuff. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.
I was 21 years when I wrote this song. I'm 22 now, but I won't be for long. People ask me, when will you grow up to be a man? But all the girls I love at school are already pushing prams. I loved you then as I love you still. Though I put you on a pedestal, they put you on the pill. I don't feel bad about letting you go. I just feel sad about letting you know.